There you go. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I hope everybody had a happy Thanksgiving weekend. This is Jennifer Bennett, Senior Director of School Business. In the room with me is Shirley McFadden, Nicola Leffler, and John Kiefer. And I do believe we have some federal program staff on the call. Tina Lightworth is joining us today for federal programs. And this is just going to be a very quick webinar today. We just invited the finance officers and pertinent people with the federal program staff. We hope this is very good news for everybody. We are continually looking to improve process and performance here at DPI. And what we found is there seems to be a lot of paperwork and a lot of angst over procurement waivers that come here to DPI related to some federal funds. And what we think we have is a potential solution for that will help eliminate some of the angst with that, some of the backlog, and some of the process workload for everybody related to these federal procurement waivers. I apologize that I can't be with you the whole webinar. I have a conflicting appointment, but I will turn it over to Shirley McFadden, and my team will be able to help you with this. We hope that you find that this is very good news, will help lighten everybody's workload, and as we work through, again, trying to improve process and performance for everybody.
Good afternoon, Shirley McFadden, Monitoring and Compliance Manager. We're going to kick off with, let's see if we can change the screen. There we go, the topics that we're going to discuss today. We want to go over very briefly competitive procurement requirements in the context of these procurement waivers. We're going to talk about the uniform guidance requirements for competitive procurement, look at the actual regulation itself, what it requires. We want to talk about the current waiver process and non-competitive procurement and when it's allowed. Then we're going to talk about those changes that Jennifer mentioned were coming up and some of the next steps that we have in place. I would like to save any questions for the end. Depending on the detail level of the questions, we may try to answer them if we have time. We will also follow up with an FAQ as well. Please put your questions in the QA box so that we can collect those and respond as well. This is my favorite screen. If you've been to any of my presentations, you know I share this screen as frequently as I can. So today is no less of an opportunity for me to share a reminder about competitive procurement, because before we can talk about waiving procurement requirements, we really want to step back and look at the bigger picture of what is required. The federal government does put these restrictions in place to primarily promote competitive procurement, right? The reason you have a fiduciary responsibility to competitively bid these purchases is to make sure that you're getting the best prices. While that some of these dollars may seem small to you, a great example was shared with me. $10,000 savings because we've competitively bid may seem nominal until you have thousands of public school units across the nation saving $10,000 each, which is going to collectively amount to millions of dollars. So competitive procurement is what the federal government promotes. It's what your state government promotes as well. Even some of your local organizations or your local boards may also require competitive procurement. Out of competitive procurement, you get the opportunity to invite the minority, women, disadvantaged businesses to the table. Out of competitive procurement, we also get the opportunity to make sure that we're maximizing every dollar for education and for the children that we're serving. That's really just a reminder that before we can talk about non-competitive procurement, that we really are required from a fiduciary responsibility perspective and legally to make sure that you're competitively bidding. This screen shows you all those great thresholds that are in place and the uniform guidance for your federal dollars, but also the state procurement requirements if you are an LEA with the requirements to follow those state general statutes. The numbers that'll stick out to you here, 10,000, 50,000 if you've raised your micro purchase threshold, $250,000. Those in red are related to uniform guidance. The dollars in black are related to your NC general statutes if you're required to follow those as a local education agency. We won't spend time talking about those, but this is really just more of a reminder of the goal of competitive procurement. Specifically in uniform guidance, I think it's important to go back to the uniform guidance before we move forward with any changes to really share that your agency, the non-federal entity, must have and use documented procurement procedures. The non-federal entity is basically any subrecipient or recipient of funds that are spending those funds. In this case, we're talking about all of the public school units. You already have to have documented policies and procedures, and probably already do, over 3 different areas when it comes to this competitive procurement. The first one is informal procurement methods. We just talked about those thresholds, and you likely already have written documented policies and procedures for the first threshold at $10,000 and under. You also should have in place, and likely already have in place, those procedures when you hit the small purchase threshold. That's going to be between the $10,000 and $250,000 mark. For a majority of you, that's going to be informal procurement, 2 or 3 quotes required to substantiate your purchases, and competitive procurement was met. Formal procurement methods are also required to be documented in place, and that's when you exceed the $250,000 federal threshold. The third bullet here is about non-competitive procurement. Uniform guidance already sets out times when you can approve a non-competitive procurement as a non-federal entity. And we'll get into that in just a moment. Right now, a majority of your policies and procedures likely say that you need to go to DPI to get those approved, and that's what we're going to talk about today. What you currently have in place probably matches what we have here, that you're required to submit a non-competitive procurement request form. Those are found currently on DPI's website. They require that you identify the justification for the non-competition and to identify the category of that non-competition, if you will. We require information about, obviously, the school, the organization, the vendor, and we will review that information. And I say we have our federal programs, Exceptional Children, CTE program staff review the purchase for allowability, and then procurement reviews the form for content before giving approval and giving you an approval and a memo to actually approve those. There are 5 times in the uniform guidance when you can actually approve, you being the organization, can approve your own non-competitive procurement. DPI does not have to be involved in 4 of those times. And I want to start by saying what the requirement is before we talk about what the change is actually going to be. So subrecipients or PSUs have the ability to already approve non-competitive procurement when it's 1 within the micro purchase threshold. Obviously, you're already doing that. If it's less than $10,000, or if you've raised it to $50,000, you can waive procurement, and currently that's built into your policies and procedures. The second one is single source. If you have done your due diligence and can adequately establish that you have a single source provider, then the organization can, again, go ahead and go forth with the procurement and not use non-competitive procurement. The third point there is public exigency or emergency. If there's a public emergency, DPI does not need to provide the approval or give you a memo for you to use the non-competitive procurement. These are no different than the micro purchase threshold, the small purchase threshold, and formal threshold. They have been explicitly identified in uniform guidance that you as an organization can give approval for these things. The last one is after you've solicited a number of sources and you've determined that competition is inadequate. Clearly, there's a state law that goes along with that one that says you really need to go, you have to go back out to rebid if it's construction, which is a very reasonable control to put in place. But you, again, have the opportunity to go ahead and procure based on that reason, if you will. The fourth one, I've left some dots there because the fourth one that's listed there is actually, this one would require that you come back through DPI. Explicitly, it says a federal awarding agency or pass-through entity, in this case, that the pass-through entity is DPI, expressly authorizes a non-competitive procurement in response to a written request from the non-federal entity. So if your organization cannot waive the purchase based on the four reasons named on this slide or in that regulation, that it's lower than the micro purchase, that it's single source, that it's a public emergency, and after you've made an effort to solicit competition, you can still come back to DPI to request a waiver. In those cases, DPI will be establishing a new process. That new process will be rolled out in January. We'll do training and an FAQ and provide guidance at that point in time to see what that will be. But we will not review the procurement waivers related to those other items going forward. So what are the changes that we're looking at? DPI is no longer going to need to review or approve procurement waiver requests related to procurement that can be awarded by yourselves, by the PSU. You already have the authority to review and approve those. We will no longer need to be involved in that process. You will, however, need to establish your own procurement waiver process. You can start with some of the guidelines and documents that we had given you previously, but it is now an internal process and will need to be documented as such. You'll need to document who's responsible, who needs to approve, at what level you would like approvals to be in place, just like any other procurement standard. The procurement standards need to be identified and they need to be documented. We will no longer review, I think we're going through the end of November. So starting December 1st, you will need to review your own procurement for these things. In January, we will roll out the new process. Ultimately, the PSU or your organizations will be responsible for determining when a purchase is non-competitive. Next steps, saying it again, your organization will need to establish and document your policies and procedures to identify the internal controls when items are available only from a single source. When it's a public emergency and a delay cannot be, you just can't compete based on the delay. And then after a solicitation of a number of resources or sources is identified and determined inadequate. You'll also want to make sure that you keep an eye out for the new process. DPI will process anything that we receive through November 30th with our normal review process. We will not be issuing memos going forward rather than a formal memo for anything that's left in our queue. You will get an approval, a programmatic approval and a procurement division approval from DPI on the original form document that was sent to us. A formal memo will no longer be issued at this point in time. And going forward, a formal memo will not be issued. There will be something that indicates DPI has given approval for what we have left. And then ultimately, we will issue some additional guidance and provide technical support. And in January, you can expect that we'll roll out the new process related to any other non-competitive procurement. That is all we have at this time. We do plan to post this presentation. And we do plan to post this presentation. We will also post the recording of the webinar. And then you'll find future guidance online and information will be posted through our regular newsletter as that information becomes available and dates are set to discuss those. I do think we have a few questions out there. Let me get to that screen. There are some in chat. All right, so. All right, so the first one is about the presentation. We had not previously posted it. We wanted to make sure we talked through it first, so that will be available on our website. Will that be as soon as this afternoon? Okay. The information, we should be able to get it out to you today, and this will be posted on the website. We were asked if we could go through a couple of examples of what would still be submitted. I want to reserve the right to kind of not answer that yet, because I do think once you start going through the requests that have been remitted, you're going to find that a good majority of them fit into places that you can already waive requirements for, or there's an opportunity or need to go back and look at your procurement approach. Some of, and I want to give an example of that, some of the waiver requests that we're receiving relate to, let's see, the curriculum continuity. And it's not really about continuity that is being requested to be waived. What we're getting questions about is, can you waive going back out to competition because there was a desire not to compete every 3 years, or they're just doing annual purchases. An annual purchase is going to put you in a position where you feel like you can't go back out to bid because it's too soon, it's going to take too much time, and you need to continue the curriculum, when maybe you're not giving yourselves the opportunity to, through the procurement process, like having a 3-year contract or 2-year contract with renewals included. So I think there's an opportunity to really question why someone needs the waiver, rather than give examples of when DPI will get involved, which I think is just going to put us right back in the same boat of receiving procurement waivers for certain circumstances. I think we're going to have to work our way through this one together. But like I said, a majority of what's on here, you can do yourselves anyway. That original document had inadequate competition, and we just talked about the fact that you can do your own waiver for that. Public emergency, obviously, is another one. Highly specialized professional services, that one becomes very interesting, because I think you need to be ready to substantiate why you feel like a highly specialized professional. It could fall under sole source, it could fall under the public emergency, or inadequate competition. I mean, some of these just fall under the other buckets already from a justification or rationale perspective. And if it goes beyond that, that's when you're going to have to come back to us. But I don't want to pull those out, because I think a majority of what we see already falls into either the other categories, or it's a procurement issue from a contracting perspective, where things are not being contracted maybe for a long enough time period to allow you all to get a service established, to determine, whether to give yourselves an opportunity to use the service without having to go right back out to bid. The last two on there, amendment, change orders, that is not a non-compete situation. If you've got an amendment or a change order, it should relate to the original project. If your amendment or your change order does not relate to the original project, then that's not an amendment or a change order, and you should not be adding that to your project anyway, or waiving those for competition. If you're concerned that those about those, we certainly can answer any questions as you're going through, and John Kiefer and myself will be here to help you as you're going through, trying to ask these harder questions of, does it fit into a category that we're able to waive ourselves? So long answer, short question, but I think all of those will really be determined as we go forward, and as you start to ask the questions internally as to whether or not it fits into another bucket, and why you're really trying to waive competition, considering and keeping in mind that the purpose of the regulation is to promote competition. So we do want to make sure we're always going back to really understanding why we're waiving that. If we're audited, what would DPI consider as documentation for a single source? These are tough questions, right? I think you have to do your due diligence around determining whether or not something is a single source. What you want to make sure you don't do is just rely on a vendor telling you they are a single source vendor or sending you a letter saying they're single source to substantiate that. If you have done your research and can adequately document some sort of justification that truly is the only provider of that type of service or good, then that is reasonable. I would say use your judgment as well if you're making that decision. And that was public, public knowledge or published in a newsletter. Would you be able to stand behind whatever documentation was presented to you? Would you sign off on it? Would your would your superintendent or whoever the highest level manager, are they going to sign off on this feeling comfortable with what it is that you've documented and provided as evidence that it's single and sole source, to be able to provide that justification? What about the approval of purchases from co-op contracts or state contracts over $250,000? So the dollar threshold does not matter when it comes to what is allowed in uniform guidance as far as non-compete and when competition can be waived, right? Cooperative contracts, I think I can put that out in an FAQ, but cooperative contracts are a whole different ballgame, right?
Yeah, those are not non-competitive procurements. Those still have to be competed in accordance with the uniform guidance requirements based on whatever threshold will be applicable to the contract itself. And I think we've discussed this in other procurement trainings and presentations, but it is on the it is the responsibility of the PSU to make sure that if you're using a cooperative or a state contract, that you have all the documentation needed to substantiate that those requirements have been met. And most of I think the state contracts we know do have.
Right, state contracts by law have to, they exceed the minimum requirements for uniform guidance. So if you're going with a state contract, you still need to document that you've chosen a state contract, but general statute establishes that their procurement practices are in compliance and alignment with, if you will, the uniform guidance requirements and exceed it. So we're aware of that and can document you're using state term contracts. But co-ops, you got to make sure you know that they have done the proper bidding. That is definitely on the order of those you as an organization to make sure they comply. It is not non-competition.
We can't issue a waiver for that to begin with. So.
Right, and DPI won't issue a waiver, and if that comes in as a request, the response will be that we can't. DPI cannot ensure that a co-op or one of those organizations has adequately done all the bidding. That responsibility lies on the PSU, the public school unit, to ensure they're comfortable making that decision. And the last question I see says, can we put the slide back up that says the instance that you would require that we submit? No slide says when we would require to submit it. Merely the law just says that it's broad. I'll find that real quick. To go. The law basically says that it says that federal awarding agency or pass-through entity expressly authorizes a non-competitive procurement in response to a written request from a non-federal entity. So if you present us with the request, then DPI can give you a waiver. And that just means that we can give you a waiver for something that goes beyond the 4 times where you as an organization can not compete for the transaction or that procurement. It does not explicitly state when that is. It just says that we can provide other waivers. So. Oh, Q&A. Okay, now I gotta switch sides and see what else we got. Okay. Do we have a sample procedure that we can share? We have 3 days to review our current procedure and get something in place if we have gaps, plus revised forms, rollout, training, etc. We can share the current, really the current form that's in place. I think that's as good a place to start as any. I would say we do not have any examples of written procedures that are out there, other than the ones that DPI would have had on our website. Let's see. Don't have any examples that we can give you at this time, but I can definitely put together a few questions and things that you'll want to consider in your policies and procedures and publish that along with the presentation that we give today. I'm not seeing any other questions.
I see one
Oh, we've got one more. Is it in the
in the
question?
chat.
In the chat. Yes.
Question, I can just read it to you if you like. Question is, will PSUs be notified if waivers are being considered? Will the requests be sent back to the PSU if they are not?
With the new process, when we roll out the new process, we will do the same thing we've done in the past. You will either get an approval or additional questions or a denial. It may look a little different than what we're currently doing, just to try to create some efficiencies internally on who needs to review. But we may also be asking for more information. We have to ask for more information in the future for waivers. We're finding ourselves in a position where we are giving you an overriding federal requirement to compete transactions. And we want to make sure that we've done our due diligence. So in that next round in the future, if it doesn't fit into one of those buckets, and you need to come back to DPI, we'll have a series of questions and a form to complete similar to what you've done in the past, but it will exclude those items that we believe already fall into those categories. And yes, you will definitely be notified that hopefully we can set up a process where we've received it, and set some time expectations on when you get a response from DPI. Depending on the amount of those requests we receive at this point in time, honestly, we're getting hundreds of these requests every week, and it's just not feasible to turn those requests around to you all in any timely fashion. But hopefully going forward, by giving you the power that you really already had to do these procurement waivers, that a good majority of them fall into those buckets, and what's left, we can be more timely in our response. But one of the things we have discussed is setting some timelines, some reasonable timelines internally to be able to respond back when those requests come to us, so that you are aware. I will say it will probably be no less than 30 days at this point in time. And there can be some considerations on, higher, maybe there's a need to do it in a shorter time period, but we've got to design a process that is reasonable on both sides of the house, internally when we get that many requests, and externally to be responsive to your needs for procurement.
Are you seeing the questions in the chat, or do you need me to continue to read them out?
There. So what is the expected turnaround time moving forward? I don't have the expected time. Ideally, for us, it may be 30 days. But again, once we get the process set up, it may be sooner. I mean, 30 days may seem like a lot of time. And I think what needs to happen is DPI may need to be involved a little sooner in the process, rather than toward the end when the decision needs to be made or a contract needs to be signed. Earlier in the planning process for procurement would be ideal for both sides, for you all and for us, to have the time to get the information that we're going to need at that point to review the requests that are coming in. How soon can we expect to hear for approvals for waivers that were submitted in October? I do know our procurement department and our program divisions are working through those and have continued to process the ones that have come in to date. And I am told that we would like to clear the backlog in December. I don't have an exact date in December. You know, if you have a specific concern that you're dealing with, please don't hesitate to reach out specifically if you're finding yourself up against a deadline for a contract. Send a quick message and we'll see how we can assist. And it may be that you find yourself in a position where if you were going to pay for it anyway, pay for it. And then if worst case scenario, DPI did not give you the waiver, you would have to move the funds. But if you were going to do it anyway, that may need to be the way forward. Understanding that, yes, the waiver may come after you make the decision, but if you find yourself in that situation, I think that's one of the best ways that you can move forward, knowing that you may have to move the funds if it was denied. It is correct that no waivers will be reviewed in December. We will accept whatever waivers come in through the end of November, but starting, so Wednesday, any waiver that we receive through Wednesday will be reviewed. You will get some type of approval on those from DPI, but we will not look at any more after December 1st. Can you expand on what you are sharing as a better way for the PSU to handle things that would have fallen under curriculum continuity? We were operating under the direction that we needed to seek a new waiver for each fiscal year. And I think that's one of our concerns. Not quite sure how that got designed into this process, but I think it's a good question. Procurement waivers should have always been correlated to the purchase itself, the entire purchase. So if you were paying for, let's say, a program and you annually paid some annual subscription for the program, you can make a contract for that particular curriculum subscription for a 3-year period to build in a renewal process to your contracting process. None of that would require a procurement waiver. It is very reasonable to purchase a curriculum program and expect to use that program for, let's say, a 3 to 5 year period. You know, that's going to be your judgment call on that side. What we want to promote is a good procurement strategy and practices, right? And it's a bit unreasonable on anyone's side to say that every year you have to go out and procure something like that. So I don't know how else to answer that other than do not build into your new processes the idea that you need to approve procurement waivers annually. What you want to do is review them as they are needed and as they come up, and you're not discouraged at all from having a multi-year contract with any organization. It's just that you don't want to have a contract that is ongoing with an organization that never ends. You just want to have a reasonable procurement strategy, like maybe you do 3 to 5 years, maybe you go less, maybe you go more, but these are things you have to talk about with your organization, the risk tolerance of your organization, and each individual purchase, quite frankly. Is it reasonable to have an annual purchase for a curriculum, or is it reasonable to go more than 1 year? You just need to make sure you have the terms and conditions in place that allow you to break the contract if you don't get the funding to pay for those particular services.
Yeah, I mean, the curriculum continuity example, I think, is a salient one because it represents kind of a unique challenge that in the context of education that might not have been fully anticipated by the crafters of the uniform guidance. When you have curriculum, you've got this very interconnected set of products and processes that all have to work together to provide kind of a seamless educational program, right? And so at different times, there's going to be movement in what that looks like and what's needed. And so, I do think there probably will be some instances where, you might need to seek a waiver, but there might be other instances, as Shirley was saying earlier, where it might fall under single source. If you've got a full curriculum structure in place and you've done enough research to establish that this one academic program is the only option out there that's going to fit seamlessly with the curriculum that you have in place, you should be able to justify that as a sole source procurement. Or, again, after you've solicited a number of sources, you might find that, this one product is the only thing that's going to work based on what you've gotten back from the various vendors, and that's what you have to use. You don't need a procurement waiver for that. So some of this, is going to continue on into the future, but part of what we're trying to encourage is for folks to think about what they might already be able to justify based on what the requirements are, instead of having to submit additional paperwork to DPI and wait for us to get back to you. In some of these instances, you already have the authority to act on your own. And so we're just trying to help empower that and to make this more efficient and less burdensome and painful for everybody. But there will still be instances where you've done all your research, you're not confident, your program folks still want this to be the one vendor, and you have to come to DPI and you have to tell us exactly why non-competitive procurement would be justified here. You will have to make the case as to, that's not really a single source, competition, would be adequate, or we haven't undergone competition yet, so we wouldn't know, but here's what we think, and we will evaluate that as we can. But for a lot of this, we were getting a lot of sole source requests that we don't have to, you don't need us to approve. We're just slowing you down. We're just gumming up the works. And it doesn't benefit anybody.
I think we have answered all the questions we've received, and we will post this presentation and share any information as soon as we start working on the guidance and the documentation available. We appreciate your time today, and thank you very much. Have a good day.